Yo, what is going on, guys? This is Black-Haired Foreigner, and today, for True and Tragic, is the Itaewon Murder. Let's say 3 people were in a restroom. One was murdered. Among the other 2 is the killer. But what happens if both claim themselves as witnesses and blame the other? In year 1997, a similar case happened in Itaewon, Seoul, Korea. A movie later released in 2009 called The Case of Itaewon Homicide is based on this incident. It all started on April 3, 1997, when 22-year-old Jung Pil Jo was walking his girlfriend home in Itaewon. On the way to her house, at around 9:50 p.m., they stopped by a Burger King and Jung Pil went to the restroom to pass water. His girlfriend waited while eating french fries, but he didn't come back. Then, a customer who opened the restroom door gasped in horror. Jung Pil's girlfriend became worried and hurried inside the restroom. She screamed in panic. The place was covered in blood and Jung Pil was lying on the corner, barely moving. He was stabbed by a knife 3 times in the right side of his neck, 2 times in his chest, and 4 times in the left side of his neck. His pants were around his legs, which indicated he was attacked while using the urinal. He died in the ambulance due to severe blood loss. According to a later interview with Jung Pil's parents, on the night of the incident, they received an urgent phone call from Yamaoka University Hospital and rushed to the hospital, assuming that their son was hurt in a minor car accident. However, when they arrived, Jung Pil was nowhere in the treatment room. Instead, a doctor led them to the mortuary, where he was lying there with his eyes still open. It was a living nightmare. Soon, 2 suspects were caught. They were 18-year-old Arthur Patterson and his friend Edward Lee, who were having a party with several other friends on the 4th floor of the same building Jung Pil was killed. They went to Burger King, which was on the 1st floor, in order to grab a snack, and they were the only people in the restroom with the victim at the time of the incident. Patterson was caught due to an anonymous phone call to the authorities saying that Patterson was the killer, whereas Lee voluntarily turned himself in when his father saw his friend Patterson was on the news and inquired his son of the incident. But both Patterson and Lee told the police that the other person committed the actual murder. Here is Patterson's testimony. Lee borrowed my knife and took me to the restroom right after the victim went inside. He said he had something cool to show me. When we were inside, the victim was peeing and I stood next to the sink, when all of a sudden Lee started stabbing the right side of the victim's neck from behind. The victim turned back by tilting to his right. Lee kept stabbing, and when the victim tried to grab me near the sink as he was about to fall down, I was so scared that I instinctively pushed the victim back towards the wall. Next is Lee's statement. Patterson told me he had something cool to show me, so we went to the restroom. I was washing my hands in the sink, and through the mirror I saw Patterson checking whether there were no one else in the room except us and the victim. Then he started stabbing the right side of the victim's neck from behind. The victim turned back by tilting to his left. I was so frightened, but he was my friend after all, so I didn't call the police. According to several witnesses, both Patterson and Lee had blood on their clothes, but Patterson's clothes were covered in more blood. However, lie detector tests showed that Patterson was telling the truth and that Lee was lying. Moreover, the autopsy results indicated that the victim was possibly attacked by a taller person, who was Edward Lee. On April 26, 1997, Edward Lee was accused of murder, while Arthur Patterson was accused of possession of weapon. On January 26, 1998, Patterson was sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in prison, but was released on August 15th after being granted a special pardon. Meanwhile, Lee, who was accused of murder, was tried and acquitted by the Supreme Court due to lack of evidence. The Supreme Court concluded that there was indeed one killer between the 2, but they were not certain whether Lee was the killer. This time, the bereaved accused Patterson of murder, but to make matters complicated, Patterson fled to the United States when the prosecutor forgot to maintain Patterson's prohibition of departure. The prohibition of departure lost its effect every 3 months, so it had to be renewed, but when it was not updated on August 23, 1999, Patterson booked a flight and fled the very next day. For more than a decade, the case became cold. In the year 2009, the movie The Case of Itaewon Homicide was released, and a TV program called I Want to Know It broadcast an episode about the Itaewon murder. The story gained national attention, and the prosecution started re-investigating the case. They used blood splatter analysis and compared it with Patterson and Lee's testimonies to find out who was lying. And guess who the blood splatter analysis pointed was lying? It was Arthur Patterson. There were some bloodstains that could not have landed as they have when Patterson's story was applied. To start with, there was a long and narrow bloodstain on the wall right above the urinal, which indicated that the victim, who was stabbed on the right side of his neck, turned to the left, which corresponded to Edward Lee's story, but did not match Patterson's. Secondly, the sink was covered in a large amount of blood, which could not have happened if Patterson, who was next to the sink, pushed the victim towards the wall as he'd said so, which makes the victim have no specific contact with the sink to cover it up in blood. On June 2011, Patterson was arrested in the U.S. for another separate crime, and on September 23, 2015, thanks to the criminal extradition treaty between Korea and the United States, Patterson finally arrived at Incheon International Airport, Korea, which was 18 years after Jung Pil was murdered. On January 25, 2017, the Supreme Court sentenced Arthur Patterson to 20 years in prison for murdering Jung Pil Jo. He is currently serving his sentence behind the bars in Korea. Meanwhile, Edward Lee took the stand as the rightful witness in Patterson's trials and is currently living an ordinary life. True and tragic. See you in the next episode.